Dile que tú eres mía, mía, tú sabes que eres mía, mía. Tú misma lo decías cuando yo te lo hacía. Yeah, dile que tú eres mía, mía.
Ah, yes. Welcome to another great episode of the Ashish and Friends Book Club. Today we are talking about The Power of Habit, written by Charles Duhigg. I've always been a big fan of this book. I've read it twice before. I've given it out as a gift to a lot of friends. I've actually given it out to Shahan once as well. And I know a lot of friends that like reading about this book. So I chose this book because I feel like we're just starting a new year. It's a great time to start and form new habits, think about our prior habits out here. And I think Charles Duhigg, who's actually an award-winning business reporter, spent a lot of time looking at research, doing some studies, and I think this is a masterpiece of a book. What are your thoughts about the book, Ryan?
I like the format of this book. I think it gave a lot of practical examples in every shape and form of life that habits apply to, whether it's sports, whether it's your daily life, whether it's in a hospital, whether it's, unconscious things that you do. And I think that really hits it home because you see the application of it in so many different scenarios. For me, the three biggest takeaways I took from this book, number one was that habits are delicate. And there's a good quote I think that hits it on the dot. It's by Warren Buffett. It's chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. So for me, it tells me that habits are hard to be formed but easy to be kept. So that's why they're delicate in so many fashions. I think it's important to keep that in mind when you're trying to form a habit. You really have to be persistent and deliberate about keeping that habit.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like you're totally right there because you can imagine, right? When you're trying to change what you've been used to for so long, it's going to be hard to try to break out of that normal routine that you're in, right? And so obviously, whenever you take on like a new challenge, whenever you try and change up your life, it can seem really daunting, and the first few days or whatever take some time, right? It seems really hard, but I think as long as you keep with it, that's what makes it a habit, and then it becomes easier as you progress.
Exactly. But the hardest part is starting it and keeping it to make sure that it progresses and ingrained in you. And the reason it ingrains in you is because it actually reshapes your brain. And that's the second takeaway I took from this book. It was really a good, a good like hitting home point just to remind you how pivotal habits are. Because even if you lose your memory in the hippocampus, your basal ganglia can still be intact, and you can still keep those habits without even realizing it. They talked about a guy who had a severe brain injury, but still had that part of the brain intact that kept his habits, and he was doing things without knowing it. So that's the power of having habits. You don't even think about doing it, which is the beauty of it too, because you wouldn't want to be thinking about how to drive a car every time you have to drive a car. So I think it's interesting to think about how the power of habits in terms of the science of it.
And I think that's a really great point right there. Like you mentioned, the driving thing, when you first start out driving, it seems scary. You don't exactly know what you're doing. Now we do it every single day and like we don't even think about it, right? Same thing with tying your shoes, to get ready for work. As a kid, when you first learn to tie your shoe, you're like, this is scary. Am I doing this right? Now it's just like, oh, it takes like 2 seconds. It's just part of your daily routine. It's ingrained in you so much and you've done it for so long, it's you don't even think about it anymore.
That's the power of habits, literally. And the third point I learned about is that willpower and ingraining habits actually spreads to your entire uh, life. If you fix one habit, that willpower and that momentum spreads to the other aspects of your life.
Yeah, exactly. And he gave it a perfect example. Is actually early in the book is someone that had a bad smoking habit, had health issues, was in debt, and had just gotten divorced. Right, so she's feeling really low, very low self-esteem, feeling depressed, and she just changed one little habit. Right, she took a trip to Egypt. She's like, forget everything. My life sucks right now. She went there, came back, and she's like, in 1 year, I'm gonna go back there and cross the desert. Right, and by the time before she did that, the following year, what she did in that year was she quit smoking. She started jogging instead, right? So instantly she's getting better cardio, like her stamina's better. She's not having all these side effects of smoking. She lost 60 pounds. She was overweight, dealing with those issues as well. She lost the weight as well. And she also like graduated with her degree, something that I think she had given up on at some point. And like life was just so much better just because that one little thing changed, right? That little one routine of, oh, I'm smoking at this time or whatever. She swapped it out for something healthier for her, and which was jogging, right? And I'm sure when she started that journey, it's probably really hard, right? You're used to that drink, you're used to that smoke, you're used to that coffee or whatever to, bring you some peace of mind. You're used to it, it makes you happy, but changing that and, doing something beneficial to you. And it's kind of like, something we're going to talk about in the next book, the compound effect, right? The compound effect of doing this routine daily and the benefits that you see over the time. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the interesting thing about this book that he did touch on a couple times, it's he's he's saying to give up the habit, but not to go cold turkey, to switch it with another healthier alternative to that habit. So he mentioned a cue routine reward system. So you have this routine that is instigated by a cue. And if you have that cue, instead of, let's say I smoke during this break, because the cue is a break, and instead of smoking during that break, you go run instead. And instead of just going cold turkey during that period, you're doing something else, so you're not thinking about that habit. And I think that's interesting, an interesting perspective on it. And instead of just saying, well, I'm just going to cut it out and not really have an alternative to it.
Yeah, before we dive into that real quick, I think it's just interesting. Two back-to-back books. Someone goes to Egypt, crosses the desert, and their life's just so much better. Alchemist, Power of Habit. I don't know. We'll see in Compound Effect if there's a Egyptian twist on there, but I think it's very fascinating to think about. But you're totally right. I think when you talk about habits, all habits are basically come about in the same fashion, right? The cue, the routine, the reward, right? Whether it's like trying to make your first $1 million, whether it's trying to get healthier, whatever it is, like it's the same cycle, right? And something you touched on, well, obviously Charles did. He does a good job also on his website, charlesduhigg.com. You have to look at what your routine is, what's causing it, how you can change it, and also think about what the reward is, right? Maybe you need to have a better reward to keep you motivated and keep going, or maybe it's the cue. What are the cue signals that kind of make you want, that urge you to do this thing, right? And think about what you're feeling, what time of day it is, all these types of things. They all play a role in it, right? And I think for Charles, he mentioned he used to go for an afternoon cookie, right? And he wasn't a huge fan of cookie. He didn't need the cookie. He didn't have like blood sugar issues or whatever. Like he was thinking about it, he's like, why am I going for this cookie? It's because he had this interaction with another coworker, right? And he found out the reason he kept going for the cookie was just to have that conversation with a coworker. So sometimes, you do things for the end result. Maybe it's like, oh, I'm going out to the bathroom, right? When you're working, you're not just going to the bathroom. You're just trying to see if you can, talk to a coworker or whatever it is. Like you just have to find out what exactly makes you happy, what you're doing it for, and cut out the unnecessary things.
And he mentions too that sometimes it's a process to understand the correlation of these parts. So it takes time and reflection to figure out what is the cue that's leading to this habit, and what am I actually seeking from this habit? Is it something healthy? Is there even a goal? And then once you come up with those answers, and he actually mentions that sometimes it's better not to give it completely up until you figure out what's causing it, to slowly wean it off, to kind of figure that cycle out so you can better assess it and change it.
Yeah, like on all three things, cue, reward, routine, like you have to spend some time, tweak with it, find out what works for you and think about, like you mentioned, take some time, think about what exactly it is that you want there and what works for you. Uh, was there anything else that you took away from this book, Ryan?
Those are the three big points I took away.
Yeah, I feel like those are great 3 points right there. I think I think just the whole book, like we talked about, is just full of research, full of great stories and things you can take away and see how actually like habits actually do control your whole life, right? And how you get so used to what you're doing and how hard it is, but like how beneficial it can be. I think for me, it was just obviously we talked about the routine, the circle there, the cycle there, but I think you just change a habit, it comes down to changing the routine, right? That's where you start. That's the starting point. You need to find out what you're doing and why. And I think just changing a habit has a domino effect in your life, right? And like I said, we'll talk about this in the next book, the compound
Compound
effect.
effect.
The compound effect. But the point is just, changing one thing, you feel happier or whatever, that could lead to other things in your life and you keep improving those things. So I think it's just a great overall thing to form these great habits in your life. And like we talked about, it can be hard. Obviously, these are things we're still working on individually as well. But we'll keep you updated on how that goes. But I think it's just so important. And you talked about willpower as one of your points as well. I think it's just interesting. He talks about that willpower is just like another muscle, right? You got to have those repetitions. It takes practice, but that's some like muscle you can strengthen on your own. And you strengthen it over time. And to do that, you have to do things that require like a lot of discipline, right? And I know it's hard; it's easier said than done. But I think just I just like the idea that you can control your willpower. Sometimes we think about you're kind of born with that willpower, right? Maybe I don't have it, you do. How do I get there, or whatever? Like it's all within you. It's just like another muscle. When you go to the gym and you work on it, you try to make it bigger, you work out and flex and whatever. Same thing with your willpower. So I think like anyone that feels like they might not have it, it's all within you. Another thing you can do is planning ahead. I think that was a big takeaway for me is planning ahead for anything is key, right? I think knowing those roadblocks is just as important from getting from point A to point B, right? So whether it's like you're a person that wants to move to a better job or whatever it is, you have to think about what the roadmap is, plan it ahead of time, and think about any like things that could get in the way, and come up with a plan to kind of overcome those things, right? Like having a roadblock on your plan could really, I think, get you off the path of where you're going to go, right? So I think Charles Duhigg mentioned about how important it is to have plan things out ahead of time and talk about these roadblocks as well.
And that's a great point because I think he did mention a study in the book that showed that people that plan things out ended up with better outcomes and better results because I think they gave notebooks to people and those actually had it filled out inside ended up with better and outcomes because they had a plan for, well, if this happened, then I'm going to do Y, and if this didn't happen, then I'm going to do X. And so they always had an answer or solution.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like this is something we talk about on nearly like on a daily basis, right? Whenever we do talk, I tell you about my plans and whatnot. And I like to plan things out just fully because you get to see where you are, where you want to be, and what steps you need to take to get there. Right. And we also talk about things that could happen on the way that could, get you off your path. So I feel like this book really resonated with me and kind of some of our personal conversations as well. So implementing these takeaways into our lives, right? So obviously things I struggle with are like sleeping on time, waking up on time, working out in the morning and getting my meditation daily, right? So just a couple of things. I think the list is never ending to be honest, right? But there's just I think I can easily try to get, form these habits of sleeping on time, putting an alarm or whatever it is. The reward could be, waking up on time, getting a lot more work done, feeling better about myself, right? So, like, the reward, like we talked about, doesn't have to always be tangible, right? Maybe it's just the benefit of the compound effect and like things you're going to do because of it, right? So, I think just knowing those cues, knowing why you hit the snooze button, right? Because you're not well rested. Maybe it's not the perfect time to get up or whatever it is. Maybe you're not motivated. But I think finding these things out could really benefit me, and hopefully everyone listening here can think about what those cues are and what your normal routines are and what kind of habits you should form. I think that's what mattered the most, and I think it's really important to repeat and automate, this kind of habit that you're trying to instill in your life.
And then also, if you do slip up, that's okay because then you can reflect and figure out why you hit the snooze button or why, like you said, maybe I wasn't well rested. Maybe I went to bed too late the night before, or I did something the night before I couldn't sleep or whatnot. And so those are always good times to remind you. And then you have your plan B or C. Maybe I need to adjust my sleep schedule, for
Yeah,
example.
exactly. And like lately, sleep is one thing I'm really focusing on this year, right? And I've been telling you about that. So like nightly before I go to sleep, I kind of write down, did I have a lot of caffeine today? Did I eat a late dinner? So that way you can also track your progress as well. And I think that's really important, right? When we talk about roadblocks, seeing also what is causing, the cause and effect of things. So I think, it's just really important and really cool to think about. We talked about the takeaways, Ryan. How can you implement some of these things in your life?
One of the things I've started doing recently is, in terms of my profession, I'm starting studying for an exam down the road, and I mean it's not a necessary exam, but it's helping enhance my knowledge and to get more certifications to progress in my field. And so to stay motivated for that exam, I'm trying to set I set a time with one of my friends that we meet every periodically, regularly to keep each of us accountable to study certain sections for that. And then also my end goal for that is not only to get the certification, but also just enhance my knowledge because obviously the world of medicine is an ever growing field. And so you can never know enough and never study enough. And so for me, the cue is probably and maybe in the middle of the morning or after I go home, instead of turning on the TV, studying for half an hour, instead of that the TV time. So that's what my diligence is a section or two doing the study and hopefully becoming smarter at the end of the day. And then in terms of rating for this book, I'm going to dive into that. I honestly, for me, this is a this for me is a 4.9 out of 5. And the only reason it's 4.9 is because I wish there was just a tad more of how to implement it in the book or actionable. But the good news is that I believe it was the appendix or after the conclusion, he does put a section in there. Here are the tools, and here's the initial planning of how to change your habits and what to think about, what to do. And it's a nice, great, detailed algorithm and plan. So I really appreciated that. But in totality, I love the book because it has so many different stories and examples and applications of habits that I feel like anybody can relate and at least have one of the stories that they really relate to and learn from and can put it in their perspective. So in terms of that and recommendations, I really recommend it for anybody because if you there's at least one story you'll get something out of and learn something, and at least it'll just ponder the thought of thinking about your habits you do every day and what's healthy and what's not healthy, what I could change.
Yeah, I love that. Wow, really high rating right there. I'll dive in my rating real quick, but before that, I do want to mention this one quote that really resonated with me and kind of like still shakes me whenever I read it, and that is the difference between who you are and who you want to be is what you do, right? Oof, man. Every time I read it, I get chills because, like, literally, right? What you want to be, what you want to become, what you're doing matters the most, right? That's why it's so important to form these habits because it literally does make such a difference. Like the before and after pictures, what's missing is the routine and habit, right? Those routine and habits is what causes the after pictures, the results you want. So I read that, I'm just like, wow, that is very powerful. For me, oh, I was actually thinking about 4.92, but you know what? I'll give it a perfect 5. All right, because I
Oh,
think this, yeah, this is. I don't think this would be a common occurrence, but this deserves a 5 because I really loved the research that he put into this. The stories, like you mentioned, are just so informational and even though it seems like a simple thing, oh, how can you write like a such a big book about a habit, right? But like there is so much you can learn from this, right? And like you mentioned, I'm sure there's an individual story that will strike with someone, right? Like whatever the story is, you'll find one and you'll be like, this actually resonates with me really well. I like the research he put in at the end. He put in like where his like studies came from. He put like the numbers, of references, and I really love that. So I thought it was just a perfect book. And talking about a whole new year, we're still in January right now. It's the perfect time, right? It's the beginning of the year. It's the perfect time to try to work on these routines and habits and change your life for the better. Full of positive vibes and really change our lives for the better and just grow as people. And I think forming these habits, things that we always have struggled with and thought about changing in our lives, like I mentioned about my sleep and working out and eating better, whatever, like it's time for action, right? And I think it's just as simple as creating these routines. We love Charles Duhigg so much. We're definitely going to be reading his other book, Smarter, Faster, Better, some point later down the road, and I'm very excited for that. For the people I'd recommend this book to, anyone that really wants to change your life, right? If you're willing to change your life, you want to grow, you want to learn why, like the psychological, the science behind, of habits, right, and how it can change your whole life. This is who it's for, right? If you just want to get better, I think this is just the perfect book, a starting point, right? It really breaks it down for you, like kind of why you get these cues, why you do these routines, and how to change them and improve your life. So I feel like anyone that's ready for a fresh start, anyone that's willing to improve their life, the power of habit is out there. So please check it out. And that wraps up this episode of the Ashish and Friends Book Club. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this book. Please let us know what you thought about the book. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And next up, we've got The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, and we're so excited for that book. Please check it out if you haven't. We can't wait to talk about it. Please share this podcast and with your friends and family. Tell them read these books. These are all beneficial books for your lives. That's what we're all about here is growth and learning and being better. So until next time, we're out. See ya.
Dile que tú eres. Conmigo tal vez.